Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
Chapter 5, Flags, with the Perrin Wolf. Hopper or Young Bull? I've heard the debate both ways.
Dream Wolf, either way, for sure.
Dream Wolf, yeah. Flags just being, I think we're talking about the Manetheren flag.
Because of the decision that Perrin has to make around no longer hiding behind the flags
right.
and all of that. Like, the flags are very much the linchpin of how he is changing his behavior because of Faile being kidnapped. And I'm going to unleash the prophet because of the things. And the flags are the linchpin of that. And stay the linchpin of how he holds the Shanshan to his alliance later.
Right.
So it's important to remind you, to flag the flags, one might say, as being important.
And it's sort of the difference between pretending to refound Manetheren and actually kind of refounding Manetheren.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, you might say that the whole point of Faile being kidnapped is this whole refounding of Manetheren goes from a deception of like, oh, no idiot would do that, to, well, now I guess I kind of got to. In order to
commit to the bit.
Commit to the bit. Fake it till you make it. In this case, he was faking a country, and then he made it.
He didn't even mean to make it, but oops. Oops, all to Viren success.
Okay, and so we start off in the Wolf Dream. He ran across the snow-covered plain, nose into the wind, hunting for a scent, for that one precious scent. The falling snow no longer melted on his chilled fur, but cold could not deter him. The pads of his paws were numb, yet his burning legs worked furiously, carrying him on faster and faster, till the land blurred in his eyes. He had to find her. Suddenly, a great grizzled gray wolf, ragged-eared and scarred from many fights, settled down out of the sky to race the sun beside him. Another great gray wolf, but not so large as himself. His teeth would tear the throats of those who had taken her. His jaws would crush their bones. Your she is not here, Hopper sent to him, but you are here too strongly, and too long from your body. You must go back, young bull, or you will die. I must find her. Even his thoughts seemed to pant. He did not think of himself as Perrin Bara. He was young bull. Once he had found the falcon here, and he could again. He had to find her. Besides that need, death was nothing. In a flash of gray, the other wolf lunged against his side, and though young bull was the larger, he was tired, and he fell heavily. Scrambling to his feet in the snow, he snarled and launched himself at Hopper's throat. Nothing mattered more than the falcon. The scarred wolf flew into the air like a bird, and young bull went sprawling. Hopper lighted on the snow behind him. Hear me, cub, Hopper thought at him fiercely. Your mind is twisted with fear. She is not here, and you will die if you remain longer. Find her in the waking world. You can only find her there. Go back and find her. That's a fun read, actually.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a really nice chapter opening.
So, a couple of things, right? He references having found Faile before in the dream. That's when she touched the wooden hedgehog. Right, and we had that whole dream sequence where he found her 3 times, and he broke the chains, and he finally was able to rescue her. He got cut up by all the falcons that came down and attacked him.
Right, my falcon, yeah.
And that's basically when he fell in love. He was like, or admitted. That's
when he realized he had fallen.
Exactly, yeah, admitted it to himself. So that was sort of it's a callback to that, and he's trying to redo it, but she's not trapped in the dream world. She is in the real world. She's just been taken away. And because remember, last time we saw him, he went out to that outer edge of the camp in the direction that she was going, and he was waiting for the scouts to come back.
Him and Talonvor sat down to get hypothermia and freeze to death together in solidarity, like the lovesick puppies they are.
And that's basically what happened, right? Like, he went into the dream world.
Pretty much.
And his body was freezing to death if Berelain hadn't come along and stolen it.
We learn from Berelain that they were both well on the path to hypothermia and freezing to death. Talonvor less so because his soul was still in his meat suit.
Right.
His meat suit was just freezing, whereas Perrin had literally abandoned the entire kit and caboodle, and it was just freezing to death in his absence, and he needed to be healed in order to not get the blackened toes that we thought that Faile or one of her compatriots should have gotten.
It's kind of crazy that he gets the blackened toes even though he's standing out there in the snow in boots for about the same amount of time.
He's not moving the whole time.
That's true. Yeah. He's not running the whole time.
Yeah, he doesn't have exertion or anything to make that happen. And he leaves his body, you know? Like, Faile stays stuck in her body in a fugue. Perrin is gone.
One of the things he does try and do is he tries to kill Hopper. And this is the whole, like, Perrin doesn't really have control in the wolf dream, but not because he's a wolf. It's because he's a man, right? Like, that's that whole... A wolf would have no problem.
He doesn't understand. He thinks that it's the wolf in him, and Hopper is sitting there like, you are a special kind of stupid.
Right.
I mean, he wasn't in any danger of actually hurting Hopper. He tries. He means it, but he's so tired and so inexperienced that Hopper's like, that is adorable. Go to bed.
Smackdown.
Yeah, he's like, you were a 4-year-old insisting that you are not tired while also passing out mid-scream. Like, go to bed, Perrin.
I like the idea of telling a toddler to go to bed and they actually try and kill you. And they mean it, but they're a toddler. So you just pick them up and put them in bed.
Right. They come at you with their fists like, I'm going to punch your face in. And it's like that.
That's adorable.
Okay.
Yeah. No, don't get me wrong.
I will stop you literally with my fingers. It's fine.
A toddler can get a lucky nut shot in, and that hurts like a motherfucker.
I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure that, you know, a good skull, back of the skull into the nose can also do a number on you.
Yeah.
But,
and
yeah.
Dude, toddler fingernails are evil.
I believe it. But yeah, Perrin wakes up in Berelain's tent. This is the infamous albatross around his neck sin that he committed of not dealing with the rumors sparked by the fact that Berelain took command of the situation when he let himself almost freeze to death.
And a big part of this chapter is everybody realizing he spent the night in Berelain's tent and whispering and making noises about it. And like all the people he passes, all their speculation is like, oh, he slept with the first man. And he's like, no, I was in a fugue state. Like, I was literally unconscious.
Right. I went to sleep in the snow and I woke up in the tent.
Right.
And no one ever actually directly says what's happening. There's this thing where the maids tell Linny that Perrin's not available because he's with the first, but it was clearly all subtext and inference. And like, no one ever said, like, they are fucking. That is demonstrably happening right now. You can listen to them. Like, that never happened. It was all inference and, oh, no, they're busy. Wink, wink. But, like, that's all it ever was. And it just spirals out from there because Linny is a prude and Berelain's maids do what Berelain wants, which is to keep that wedge irritated because of the way Perrin handles her offer of truce in this chapter. Like, there's this whole thing where, like, it could have been stamped out and just a weird thing that Linny had going on, but instead Berelain, like, lets the flames grow.
Yeah, because there is that moment where she says, hey, I'm offering a truce. And Perrin, being the dumbass that he is like, a truce about what? Like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, because he doesn't see it as a game.
Right.
And so he doesn't want to play the game, so he can't call a timeout because it's just life for him. Right? You can't call a timeout on life. I don't know what you're talking about. You're just being weird, is basically his implication. And she's like, well, fine. If you don't want to admit that we're playing a game, I will win that game. Yeah.
She's very affronted. And he, like, in the text, he's like, I don't know why she's affronted. And it's like, you are so ridiculous right now, Perrin. You just told her that you don't see or validate her entire experience right now, and she is being as open and honest and forthright and cards on the table as she possibly can be. You just looked at her and said, what? Like, of course she's mad. She's trying to be honest. And you're like, she even smelled honest. She's such a liar. It's like, Perrin.
Trust your nose.
Perrin.
Yeah, right?
He trusts his nose every time except for this because he just knows her so well that she can even make herself smell in accordance with her lie because he just knows her better than his nose knows.
Perrin is a terrible empath. He is the worst empath. Like, it helps him, don't get me wrong.
This chapter exemplifies that argument to the fucking nines. Ugh. It's like, I am so bad at people and I can tell that the situation is not what he thinks it is.
There's a little paragraph here describing how they found Perrin. You and your armsmen might have frozen to death if I hadn't gone looking for you when Narelle returned with news of my scouts. And we'll talk about what that is in a second. No one else had the nerve to disturb you. Apparently you snarled like a wolf at everyone who did. When I found you, you were so numb you couldn't hear anyone speak to you, and the other man, that's Talonvor, was ready to fall on his face. Your woman Linny kept him. All he needed was hot soup and blankets, but I had you carried here. You might have lost some toes at best without Honora. That's the Aes Sedai who's going to heal him. Yeah, you slept like a man almost dead. She said you felt almost like someone who had lost his soul. Cold no matter how many blankets were piled on you. I felt it as well when I touched you. So this is the whole, like, you're here too strong, a young bull. You're going to die. Your flesh suit is deteriorating without you. And you need healing. You
need to go back and accept the healing. Your body can't heal without you there.
But the important bit was about her scouts, which is they found her men dead in ambush, killed before they had gone more than 5 or 6 miles. So Berelain's men were ambushed by, I believe, the Prophet's men.
Either the Prophet's men or this other mysterious army, but definitely not the Aiel. That much is certain, is that it was not the Aiel that killed those scouts.
And I guess the other army is White Cloaks.
Yeah, I'm actually confused about who the other army is, because I don't think it ever gets resolved. Like, it never actually matters.
Right.
It's this weird red herring, and White Cloaks would make sense because they are fleeing from the Shan-Chan, right? They are running ahead of the leading edge of the Shan-Chan, so for them to come screaming by all these other armies and not do anything, that fits the White Cloak MO at that moment.
It's also, I mean, this is what we see is these five groups come together: Aiel, Perrin's army, White Cloaks, and when I say the Aiel, I mean the Shaido and associated folks. The Shan-Chan, I feel like I'm missing one.
Perrin's army has a lot of different pieces.
That's true, yeah.
Because you've got, like, the Mayenners, the Gildanon, and the Two Rivers people, as well as his Aiel.
And the Prophet, right, the Prophets.
The Prophet.
Yeah, obviously.
Of course.
So yeah, a lot of groups are coming together in this wilderness, sort of, and a lot of them are being pushed out by the Shan-Chan, but yeah, that's these 5 big groups coming together through, I mean, severe and twisting, basically.
It comes into a powder keg.
So, I mean, I guess those men could have been killed by Shan-Chan, but I get the feeling the Shan-Chan are still further away. They're on the other side of the Prophet's men.
Right, and the Prophet is both nearby and murderous and trying to hide things that Berelain's scouts do ultimately find out, even though they haven't found it out yet. Like, there are secrets that the Dragonsworn are trying to hide, so they are definitely the best candidates in terms of location and motive.
So we get the whole... You know, Perrin's like, where are my clothes? Which, first of all, like, he's naked in her tent.
He was undressed in her tent, yes. But that is kind of standard issue how you warm people up.
Right, you take off their cold, freezing, wet clothes and put them under blankets.
I mean, he's lucky that she didn't pull a Rand and snuggle in naked next to him, because that is technically the most, medically advisable
skin to skin, right? I mean, well, are we sure she didn't?
No, we are not. No, we are not. We can probably feel pretty certain that, she didn't, rape him, but there may have been some medical cuddles that she got in
Medical cuddles.
It's a little creepy, and I'd like to think she didn't, but we don't know she didn't.
Are we sure she didn't build an igloo first?
There's certainly enough snow around for it.
It's just an interesting role reversal.
Igloos are only for consensual encounters, though.
Oh, okay.
Which was, I mean... Now scratch that. The igloo was not a consensual encounter. That was just weird.
Yeah, not at first, for damn sure. The whole running away to the other side of the world to get away from a guy, and then he follows you.
Yeah, and then you just go for him without actually talking about it first. You just grab his hair and say, "This is happening now." Consent was a bureaucratic afterthought in that scenario. It does apply retroactively, but really convolutedly.
Well, and I always wonder how much of that was her giving in to prophecy. Not as something she wanted, but as something she foresaw by going through the accepted test and was like, fine, I guess I can't get away from it anymore.
I think she wanted him at that point. I think that the emotion of wanting him and wanting to not want him is what drove her to have that creativity.
That's fair.
Which is why I do think that consent does apply retroactively through a
internal
very convoluted
conflict
series of things. Yeah, it was an internal conflict rather than an interpersonal conflict.
Right.
So, like, but in any case, that may very well have been what the maids were saying when they told Linny, oh no, Berelain's occupied with Perrin. It might have been like she's literally skin to skin warming him up, which is clearly code for sex, even though it's almost definitely not, because Berelain has a few lines that she will not cross, and I think sleeping with a man who's so frozen he can't even get an erection probably is one of them.
Maybe it was frozen stiff, but maybe it wasn't just
you gotta chill.
maybe it wasn't just black toes that we're talking about here.
Oh God, that was uncalled for.
Frostbite, it's nasty in the extremities. One thing I noticed, Berelain here leaves the tent without bothering to take a cloak. Another one of those people who's just ignoring the cold casually, which makes me wonder, is she a forsaken red herring at one point? You know, could she be? Yeah,
she responds to the cold most of the time, but not always. And it's like, is that because she's very emotional or because she forgets to keep her forsaken mask on?
Right. And also being so pretty, there could be like a mask of mirrors going on. I mean, we obviously know she's not forsaken, but on a first read, I always like to see, like, is Jordan throwing some red herrings at us with these who are the forsaken? Because, like, we all, you know, the readers at the time when these books came out were trying to guess who were the Forsaken hiding as. And I think it would be very effective to have one be, like, wouldn't that be cool to be, like, Berelain was actually, like, Maseama this whole time? Or Semirog this whole time, right? I think that would be kind of cool to be like, she's been close, she's been effective, and it turns out she was just worming her way in closer.
Yeah, I don't think I ever really picked up that as he was laying it down. But I do think that, yeah, he makes sure that not all the good guys are easily picked out as good guys, and that there are a little bit of... The red herrings are not all created equal. Sometimes it's just the tiniest hint, just enough to be like, any one of these things about a Forsaken isn't enough to tell you. You need all the things, because any given person might have these features sometimes.
Right. Yeah. It's not like, oh, the second someone ignores the cold, automatically we know they're Forsaken, right? Because people do it all the time because they're being foolish or whatever.
Or just angry. I mean, like, I've definitely ignored the cold because I get hot when I get angry. Like, I'm the kind of person that gets very physically heated when I get emotionally heated. So, like, yeah, stomping out of the tent in a tizzy without a coat, very on brand for a normal human experience.
One of the things that Perrin is suffering from through both of these chapters is the lack of food, right? He's been healed. He's been standing on this, you know, being cold pulls a lot of your reserves. Then being healed pulls a lot of your reserves. And he keeps walking away from food. And it's just one of those, it's those funny things that, like, when Rand is really exhausted and keeps piling on, like, Perrin is really hungry, but keeps avoiding the food. And there's a bit of a trope around Perrin and food, like this whole, like, wanting raw red meat and getting fruit. It's like, without Faile there to make sure he gets the right food, he goes hungry.
Yeah, he's very feral. Feral to the point of absurdity, because animals are not that good at neglecting themselves. But, you know, hyperfocus is a thing that I think most of us can relate to, and that does help you neglect eating.
The next thing I have is the whole talking about the truce, and he says, why do we need a truce? She replies with, very well, if that's how you want it. She smelled affronted of all things.
She offered him an absolutely safe space to have this emotional thing in, and he turned around and just said, how about fuck you? Like, that's how she's reading it. And yeah, that's an affronting moment. It really is.
Yeah, I don't really have any other way to put it other than him being like, Perrin, that was dumb. Because you know what's going on, right? Like, you've complained about it non-stop for like 3 books. Like, we know that Berelain is pursuing you. You've told her to stop multiple times. And now when she's actually offering to stop, you go, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you've called it a game before. You have yelled at her, I'm tired of your childish games. You know it's a game.
Right.
She's speaking in a rule set that you have acknowledged you recognize. And you are insulting her giving you this extremely valuable gift. And I mean, I don't like what Berelain does, but I understand her deciding I offered to take a break and instead I'm going to double down.
Right.
Like, I understand why she makes that inflection point, even though I hate everything about what she does. It's like, yeah, no, he was pretty rude. He deserved some kind of retaliation for that behavior. But he is also hangry and distraught,
right.
So, not at his best.
So she tells him that Maseama is bringing thousands of people, even though he agreed to only bring in 100, which later we get, oh, well, they wanted to come and I couldn't stop them, which is, we know, total bullshit. They do whatever he says.
Maseama is so nonsense. Like, it's funny, too, how he's very shrewd, but also Perrin just smells pure insanity from him. So his insanity is not gibbering in the moment, no cognition. Insanity is being very, very... Well, insanity is a lot of things. But in his case, it's being deeply, deeply driven to very specific goals.
He's crazy, not stupid.
Yeah. I feel like, especially the way that our language has smashed all these words together and turned them from categorical slurs into just whatever, they become synonyms. And it's like, no, crazy and stupid are not synonyms at all.
It reminds me, who was the captain who Rand was like, are you worried about following a crazy man? And he's like, I followed a crazy man who had a tree. He made me name the trees and bury them all. Crazy isn't
Bashir.
Oh, was it Bashir? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's Bashir.
Who was like, I don't mind crazy as long as you win.
Right, like, I buried 30 oak trees because they deserved proper burial rites after he cut them down for staring at him. But he won battles.
Mm-hmm. Zool is confirming it was Bashir. So, yeah, no, that makes sense to me that, like, crazy's not really a problem as long as you are winning and as long as you're being a leader. And, I mean, Maseama kind of is, right? Like, he's got control of a kingdom. People follow him. He has power.
Yeah, his star is ascendant currently.
And he's been meeting with the Shan-Chan.
That is the next thing, is both the double reveal to Perrin of the fact that Faile are spies and what they discovered with their spying. Those are both reveals to Perrin in this moment. Like, Berelain had figured it out as of yesterday. Probably Balwer knew for the longest time, but Perrin was completely in the dark until this moment that Faile was how Faile is doing her spy networking thing, which is like, again, are you blind, deaf, and dumb? Like, come on, Perrin.
And Berelain's being like, very clever of you to hide that. He's like, yeah, I was totally hiding my knowledge of that.
Right. She's like, I didn't think you could be that discreet. It's like, well, plausible deniability. Right. It's the thing.
Like, well, my wife didn't tell me, so I didn't know. So that's how I kept it a secret. It's like the same way that my dad never revealed to me what I was getting for Christmas. It's because he never knew in the first place. My mom would buy it and wrap it and put it under the tree. And I'd be like, Dad, what am I getting? He'd be like, if I knew, I'd tell you. But, I haven't seen it. I'm as curious to find out what's in those boxes as you are. There's a very dad vibes with Perrin in terms of like, yeah, I'll find out where those spies. He knew that Balwer was spying. But I don't think he realized that he had this whole group of Faile sort of at his disposal.
He hasn't used them yet. Balwer starts using them after this.
No, I thought he had been using them at this point.
No, it's once they swear to him. Once Faile swears to Perrin.
Okay.
Then Balwer is like, well, since I'm your secretary, I think I can keep them out of your hair and useful. I don't think he felt like he could make that offer earlier in the relationship, and when Faile was still in the picture, like, probably that would have come up eventually, but I don't think it does until this whole situation goes down. Mm-hmm. But it becomes very, very effective. I mean, Balwer is effective all on his own, and once he gets a bunch of young punks that can be trained into being at least halfway sneaky, like, it goes very well for Perrin's household, I think, going forward for the next several decades. This is a very, very good, productive relationship that gets started.
I always wonder about the effectiveness of Faile, because, like, there are these nobles who have no real practical experience trying to be Aiel, trying to be spies. And it's always like, man, it feels like a weird skill set, but it works for them, right? They seem to be able to hide their uppity upbringing a little bit and actually sort of blend in a little bit. I'm not sure if that's the right way to talk about it.
I think that they become really good at using their noble appearance as a smokescreen for what they're actually doing. And behind that smokescreen, they don't really know what they're doing at first. And then over time, they figure it out. But they're very good at having that, like, nobility persona dialed down from their original flamboyance, because now it's a front-facing, like, screen instead of just their personality. I think that they hide in plain sight. I think that that's really how they're effective, is they hide in plain sight. But we don't see it on screen, so...
Everyone thinks they're dumb, so they just let them...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're like, oh, you're quiet enough to hang out and take my wine cup when I'm done with it. I'll just talk about whatever state secrets and not consider that you're listening. Best I can imagine. Mm-hmm. Because, yeah, I don't know how else they're learning the secrets of spycraft. I guess maybe Balwer's teaching them, like, forgery and shit on the side. maybe
that's how they become effective, is Balwer's, like, you know, takes them and slaps around a little bit and is like, all right, here's what you actually need to do to be good at your jobs.
7 Balwer's secret spy school.
Right.
Located in the Two Rivers.
That'd be a fun commercial.
It would be. But yeah, Maseama is the other part of this discussion, which is Perrin is now learning that Maseama is meeting with the Shan-Chan and needs to decide something about that. And he decides to just kick that can down the road because he can't do anything about it.
There's some flirting with Berelain here where Perrin's like, why is she flirting now? And it's like, because you just told her that you weren't going to have a truce, so now she's flirting because that's how that works. Perrin.
Yeah, Perrin, you told her you wanted to keep flirting effectively, so she's going to continue to flirt with you, and she's going to flirt harder because you did it in an insulting way.
And here's where we get the line, despite what you may have heard, you'll only be the 3rd man to share my bed. Which, didn't she say the same thing to, like, Rand back in the day when she was trying to flirt with him? No? Okay, so this is the only time that we hear her say that.
Yeah.
So she slept with 2 other guys. She said it was politics, right? This whole, like... Again, why are we fucking keeping count? Nobody cares.
Well, I think it matters when this is the first one that will be for pleasure.
Yeah.
I think that's mostly where she's keeping count for. It's like, so by the way, you'll be the first one that I actually want to sleep with. So that's something. And I do completely believe her about that. She wields her sexuality so effectively. She cannot be giving it out very often to have that much sway over all the people that want it.
Well, that's the whole thing with the Damani, right? Where Leanne was like, yeah, my aunts could, you know, strike up a fire with their sexiness and then put it out just as quickly. And they never had to put out. And her aunts were like, well, and if you do fuck it up, yeah, enjoy it. You know, like, but the whole point of is if you're skilled enough with your beauty, you don't really actually have to sleep with anybody. You're flirting with them, not seducing them.
Yeah. And like, you know, say what you will about like how valid it is that holding something aside makes it more valuable when it comes to women's sexuality. There's a lot of purity culture prudishness in there. What I'm saying is that in the mechanics of the world, that is a thing we have established, that like when women use their sexuality to manipulate people, it's through withholding. Like,
right.
That it's very believable that Jordan wrote Berelain to just straight up be like that. Mm-hmm. And it makes a lot of sense when it comes to politics, because politics are weird and I don't get it. So stupid rules make sense. And then she says, you'll be a pleasure in more way than one, because this is at least half about getting back at Faile at this point.
And I honestly think that's the real reason why she wants Faile to still be alive, is so she can win.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, I want to beat her. And I can't beat her if she's dead.
Yeah, getting her widowed husband is not the same thing as stealing her husband. That's very, very different.
And then I love this. When he wanders away or walks off, she calls after him, remember, discretion, as loud as she can. It's like, remember, be discreet. Don't tell anybody what we did. Just yelling.
Remember, you weren't here.
Like, way to not be discreet, Berelain. That's absolutely manipulative. I love the way she's just bringing that back in. It's just the fun part about Berelain. It can be frustrating, I get it, but from her perspective, it's like she's going to win. She's going to absolutely spread those rumors without actually saying anything herself.
It's very discreet of her, honestly. She makes it look like an innocent mistake when in fact it's calculated to the 9 hells.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I also think that she's right on the money with her wanting to kill Maseama. She's on the side of we should put him down like a rabid dog. And like, that is not to gain his favor or to manipulate him. That is her honest to God opinion. And
I mean, Perrin, when Berelain thinks it, Faile thinks it, the wise ones think it, the Aes Sedai think it, right? Like,
there's one Aes Sedai who disagrees with all the rest, and you're going to listen to her? Like, cherry picking your wise people opinions over here.
No, well, that's when Faile finally puts Maseama down. It's very satisfying.
Yep.
Because it's like about fucking time.
And it's like, what, the day after she gets rescued? Like, she gets back, has one sleep, and deals with that situation. Like, how is this not been dealt with in my absence, Perrin? Do I have to do everything around here?
In fairness, Perrin did wipe out pretty much all of these followers by sending them first against the Aiel, which is an obvious, like, he knew what was going to happen. He knew they were going to be slaughtered. He was like, yeah, no, they deserve it. Like, it's pretty cold-hearted that he was able to send. Also, the fact that he was willing to send all of Maseama's followers up against the Aiel to be slaughtered and not actually just kill Maseama.
Yeah, feels a little inconsistent.
Yeah. It kind of feels the way that the White Tower kept sending Gawain into dangerous situations to try and get him killed.
Yeah, very much so.
Which is not, I don't know. It's one of the, there's a lot of morally ambiguous things Perrin does while Faile is kidnapped.
Yeah.
And you might say it's his descent into moral grayness that ends when he cuts off a man's hand and realizes that is, he's sort of following the same path that Aram is following. And if Aram has any point, it's to say that if Perrin hadn't thrown away the axe, that's what he would have become.
Yeah. Yeah, but this is when he really leans into the axe. When Faile gets taken, he says, I will burn the entire world down. I will let Maseama loose on the countryside. I will forswear every moral line I've ever had. And he stops struggling with the hammer versus the axe for a while. He really leans into the axe. And then, yeah, he cuts a man's hand off and throws it away and walks away the way Elias told him to. Yeah, this is really...
Yeah, he stops struggling with moral questions. It's just, whatever I need to do to get back Faile. No more that's my guiding light. No more morality.
Yeah, and it's a dark time. It's not as bad as Darth Rand, but it certainly has its parallels to Darth Rand. Darth Perrin is a scary motherfucker.
So he's walking through the camp. He comes upon a tent with 2 serving women and 2 of Berelain's thief catchers. So these are essentially Berelain's people, servants in a tent. And as best as I can tell, they're just gossiping about him sleeping in the tent with her.
That's all I can tell either. I don't see anything particularly interesting in the thief catchers, the way that they look at him and then just leave. Like, there's nothing really into it. I think that they're just trying to hold a straight face and stay out of Berelain's like shenanigans. They're like, above our pay grade. We're thief catchers. Goodbye. Thank you.
Robert Jordan is telling you not to care about these characters when he says, not even I can tell the difference as the writer, which one's which. Right? Because Perrin walks... They don't have last names. There's 2 of them. He's like, one's Santis and one's Gendar, and I don't know which one's which, and neither will you. And there's no way for you to tell.
Don't they die later? Doesn't one of them at least die? I didn't look them up, but I feel like there's she sends them back into Maseama's camp like after they come out with that letter from Suroth.
Yeah, I think the prophet does end up killing them.
But yeah, when he's like, they have no last names and no distinguishing features, and their names are ridiculous. It's like, don't get attached.
Physical description, he is nondescript.
Very helpful.
Yeah, so they're the ones who steal the letter of protection that Perrin, that's like where that letter of protection comes from. And then she sends them out again, and they do not return. Crossroads of Twilight, Chapter 6.
Yeah, so red shirts, which R.I.P. Nichelle Nichols. Just
yes.
In case anyone missed that news from yesterday.
Uhura.
Yeah, Uhura. Lieutenant Uhura now rests among the stars with many of her fellow crewmates, and it is sad, but also she was 89 and did wonderful work, so it could be sadder. Anyway, I noticed here for the first time, I think ever, that one of the maids has Nynaeve's alias name, Nana.
Oh.
I don't know if I've always thought that was just a one-off name, but no, actually it is one of Berelain's maids, is also Nana. That's a real name that he recycled for a real person elsewhere in the world. And yeah, so he asks for directions to the Prophet's camp. They act like tittering, Barbie blondes because it's fun to mess with him and point him off in a direction. And he wanders off in that direction over a chapter break and into all the menfolk and the army stuff and lots of walking through the snow.
And sort of at the end of this chapter, he thinks about the flags.
Yes, the flags that are the point of the chapter.
I was also just thinking one of the other things might be is just all the red flags that Berelain's putting out.
Yeah. But yeah, he basically thinks about how he was going to hide behind the flags, like in plain sight. And now, because of how he needs to change plans, because he's assuming that Maseama won't come with him, which means he has to point Maseama without a handler to go east and find Rand.
Mm-hmm. A very large price he was prepared to pay.
Yeah, he'll be taking away the whole bubble of everything that those flags represent by turning to go deal with Faile and leaving the Prophet. And that's a red flag, one might say.
And yet the Prophet agrees to go with him, which is, we can talk about that in the next chapter, but what the fuck, Maseama?
It's a very weird, fast decision.
Yeah. Which I think it's all anchored in the fact that Maseama wants nothing to do with Rand himself and doesn't want to get near him. And so he's doing everything he can to stall.
Absolutely.
The Red Eagle of Manetheren and his own wolf Interesting. In my head, I've always read that as Wolf Shed Banner, but it's Wolf's Head Banner. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amazing. Wolf Shed Banner.
It's kind of like a watershed, but for wolves. It's a wolf shed.
Exactly. Yeah. This is the first time reading it out loud that I'm realizing I've absolutely read that word wrong every single time I've read that. It's so funny when you do that. The Red Eagle of Manetheren and his own Wolf's Head Banner hung limp in the falling snow on two staffs leaning against a cart. He had planned to use those flags with Maseama in the same way he had to come south, hiding in the open. If a man was mad enough to try reclaiming Manetheren's ancient glories, no one looked further to any other reason for him marching with a small army. And so long as he did not linger, they were far too pleased to see the madman ride on to try stopping him. There were enough troubles in the land without calling more down on your head. Let someone else fight and bleed and lose men who would be needed come spring planting. Manetheren's borders had run almost to where Murundi now stood, and with luck, he could have been into Andor, where Rand had a firm grip, before having to give up the deception. That was changed now, and he knew the price of changing. A very large price. He was prepared to pay, only it would not be he who paid. He would have nightmares about it, though. And so that price was sending Maseama off on his own to rape and loot and kill on his way to Rand. And he's like, but that's not ends up what's happening in the second chapter.
Yeah, he assumes that he has just unleashed a tsunami of war crimes on the land, which, on the one hand, that tsunami of war crimes was already happening whether or not he did anything.
Right.
He simply would have redirected it, not started it. And he makes a very reasonable assumption that Maseama won't come with him, and then Maseama takes all of 0.5 seconds to change his mind, and it's very confusing to all involved.
Even to me, I'm still not entirely sure. Again, my working theory is that Maseama's trying to avoid Rand himself, but Maseama's crazy. I don't know what he's thinking.
He's compelled. He's got interesting, conflicting, probably requirements on him. He's running someone else's program. He's not acting from his own volition. It's the best I got.
And that leads us right into chapter 6, The Scent of Madness.
Which I believe is the Falcon symbol again?
It is the Falcon, yep.
Yeah, I don't quite know why. I guess because of the ending line of the chapter.
Because he's pursuing the Falcon. We're bouncing between Falcon and Wolf symbols.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, again, these chapters are slow. And sometimes it's like, I'm just picking out generic wolf and falcon. This is about Perrin and Faile, so wolf and falcon icon. It's not about what's happening in the chapter. It's about who the chapter's about. Seeking through the falling snow for Daniel, Perrin found him at one of the fires and pushed between the horses. The other men straightened and backed away enough to give him room. Not knowing whether to offer sympathy, they barely looked at him and jerked their eyes away when they did, hiding their faces in their cowls. "Do you know where Maseama's people are?" he asked, and then had to conceal a yawn behind his hand. His body wanted sleep, but there was no time. I think that's enough of a read-in for this chapter. And which is to say, the reason they're not looking at him is because they think he's been cheating on Faile, and they're ashamed.
Yeah, they're ashamed of him. They're ashamed of the fact that they're thinking that based on rumor. They don't know how to handle it. Like, there's a lot going on, and it all adds up to no eye contact.
Perrin brings up Berelain's men dying, and he's like, we don't know that it's the Prophet's men, but we know it's the Prophet's men.
It's so obvious. Something I wanted to ask you about was, just after that, he thinks that by this time the Aiel will expect him to be following. They never do, though. They have no sense of the fact that they kidnapped noble ladies from a traveling army that will be following to retrieve their people. That never enters the calculations.
No.
It's silly. I mean, you'd think that they would wonder where these nobles came from.
But they're such a big nation, and it's Savannah, so she never wonders. She's just going around killing people. She sees them as lesser. There's no, like, understanding. And also, I think Faile does... Well, I was going to say she does a good job of hiding who she is, but they do figure out she's Perrin's wife. But I don't think they know that Perrin has this army.
But they never ask where she came from, like, how she got into their path, like, where else was the rest of her party? Like, they never interrogate why she was, like, was she with anyone else? Like,
it's some nobles going out hawking, right? Like, they don't have to be part of an army. They don't have to be part. And, like, frankly, Perrin's army is pretty insignificant at this point.
Yeah,
right? It's not that big. It's not that many people compared to the whole Shido nation on the march with a bunch of brotherless along. Like, they literally do not care with all the channelers of the Shido, right? Which is a lot of channelers. An army of a couple hundred.
Yeah.
They don't care. They literally don't care.
That's true.
You know, they don't understand the culture they're in. They're not really sending out scouts to figure out where all the troops are. They are just depending on their size to be good enough to protect them from all threats. It's like, if you're a juggernaut, you know, if you're the lion on the hill, right, you don't worry about gophers underneath your feet, even though they can dig a hole for you to fall into. And it is. I mean, Perrin has to assemble multiple armies together and also trick them with Forkroot in order to be capable of taking down this force. That's
true. He pulls out all the stops and still barely manages. Yeah, so it's funny, though. He expects them to be looking out for him, so he's cautious. And, you know, I mean, Faile, or Galena, is shocked when she sees how long they've been encamped where they are when they capture her. Like, he's so slow and methodical, despite how frantic he is. And you'll never see him coming, and they never even knew to look. He assumes they're looking and then hides from that, and, like, they never even look. So he's so sneaky.
Which may save him from the Shanchan.
That's a good point.
That the hiding and the sneaking around does save him, I think, from being attacked by all the other forces that are out there.
Yeah. Which reminds me, when we were in the last chapter saying we didn't know what the other army was, it's definitely Shanchan, because we get the whole discussion about tracks and stuff.
Well, I think there's two groups, right? Because there's the Shanchan group, but I think the ones who killed Berelain, well, the ones who killed Berelain's scouts are definitely not Shanchan.
Right, but they're probably the Prophet's people, not White Cloaks.
Agreed.
I don't know if there's actually any evidence of there being White Cloaks. Anywhere near here.
Again, I think that they're all present, right? I think that all the groups are around.
Could be.
So I think he's discovering both groups, because I think in that first group that they discovered, they would have known from the weird hoof prints that it was Shanchan. Unless they're referring to the same group. But I don't think they are. I think this is a third group that they're stumbling upon.
It's too many mystery armies in this plot. Calm down.
Which mystery army is this? Is the same as the other mystery army? That might also be the other reason that the Shan-Chan aren't concerned, is they're just like, oh, there's a bunch of armies everywhere. Sorry.
So there's wild times out there.
That might be why the Shido. Gosh, Shido, Seafolk, Shan-Chan, Ciane. Jordan, not everything has to start with an S, and my name starts with an S, so I get it. Like I
At this point, we have Daniel being told to tell the wise ones to be careful, and being like, okay.
I do like the whole Kenley reference where Perrin's like, he should not grow a beard if he was going to scratch it all the time. The thing was straggly anyway, right after Perrin's been scratching at his beard. Because he scratches at it all the time. Like, it's itchy. It's just like, and Kenley is growing it in imitation of him. It's just funny that Perrin's like, oh, all these young whippersnappers growing beards with his full beard. It's, again, that Wheel of Time hypocrisy that Jordan loves to stick in there.
Yeah, and it's a nice reminder of the fun vibes from Shadow Rising. You know, even though we're all the way out here in Book 9, it's a little callback to the Shadow Rising dynamic from the Two Rivers. This one line, though, from him is so sad. He could feel a chasm growing wider between him and the other men from home, and he seems to be the only one who wanted to bridge it. It's so sad.
He's a leader. He's a king. Nobody, like, the isolation of being in charge of people. You know, it's something that Rand has absolutely settled into. It's something that Elaine is aware of. And, you know, it's one of the reasons why I think Rand and Elaine have always gotten along so well as a pair, is they're both isolated as rulers and understand what that requires. Whereas Perrin is unwilling. It's one of the reasons why he's kind of bad at being a ruler, is he doesn't want to admit that he is king. He still wants to be best friends with all these people. He's like, what? We hunted together. He wants to be the
leader of a wolf pack.
Right.
He doesn't want to be the leader of a nation. He wants to be the leader of a pack.
Yeah, well, it's too big for a pack. There's too many people, too many alliances. He needs to lead.
Yeah.
So then we've got Gil sort of basically saying, you know, feeding him information, right? Like, Talonvor ran off. There's a bunch of references to basically Magdan being the Queen Morghese, right? I'm very fond of Magdan. I feel like I've known her my whole life. She deserves better. She's as important as Lady Faile. Like, he's basically saying all these things because she is Queen Morghese, and he feels loyalty to her.
Mm-hmm. And concern for her, even if she isn't the queen. It's still her. Yeah.
He's still like, Gil is basically trying to say to Perrin, listen, Magdan's a queen who needs rescuing just as much as the other queens. And Perrin's like, yeah, I don't give a shit. I'll find her when I find Faile, right? Like, and if not, then too bad.
Yeah. Which is not what either of them is really consciously saying, but it is very much what the subtext is saying. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because, yeah, Perrin's like, I mean, Perrin even does think to himself, like, I would let them all go for Faile, but I don't think Gil is trying to tell Perrin that it's a queen. He just can't help himself because he's a good queen's man and his instincts won't let him not have these words come out, right?
And then Perrin puts his foot in his mouth with Lenny. Forgive me, Lenny. I didn't get much sleep last night. Oh, really, didn't you? Of
all the things you could have said to her.
Right. Just absolutely the worst thing to say to Lenny right there, because the implication is you were up busy fucking, right? Like, when in reality he was asleep, he was just asleep in the wolf dream, so he was asleep, he just didn't get any rest.
Right. He got healed, but he didn't even eat. He is exhausted. Yeah, and Lenny is not well primed to hear this in a charitable way. She has already made up her mind what she thinks of him. She is already wound to a fever pitch with concern and is very cranky, and I don't think would believe anything he said in a good light, but certainly not that set of words.
Well, and remember, she's also on edge because of what Ravine was doing to Queen Morghese. He was sleeping with a bunch of other women while sleeping with Morghese, right? He was cheating on her that whole time.
I hadn't even thought of that.
And so Lenny's sort of in that same reactionary, like, sup from too many dishes and you deserve a bellyache that'll split you open, especially when they're not your dishes. And by dishes, he means she's saying women. Right, that's, you know, sleep with too many women and you'll deserve a bellyache that'll split you open. And that's Lenny sort of basically also just in that, like, men who cheat are bad.
Yeah.
Which we can all agree with, but she's been reacting to, I think, especially sensitive because of what Morghese has gone through.
Yeah, and it definitely has a lot of, like, all men are pigs and I thought you were better, but you aren't.
Right.
It kind of has that sort of vibe, which is just... Linny is a problematic fave, I would say. She has a lot of attitudes that are very distasteful while also being the most quotably wonderful character.
Well, it's been interesting because, again, personal stuff, but my girlfriend's sister's boyfriend was cheating on her, right? And got caught. Been doing it for a while. And it's amazing how much that is on the forefront of her mind, and all of her friends and sisters. They're all very much being like, men are pigs, cheating is bad, cheating men should go to fucking hell, right? Like, that's a lot of what they're thinking about. And so I'm just sort of thinking Linny as being in that group. And it's like this very real world reaction that I've been dealing with in my life is sort of what I'm thinking of as Linny feeling that way. It's like basically she's in support of her bestie to be like, cheating men suck. Take them down.
Yeah, I'd never thought of that. I only had considered it from the like, oh no, my charge is in physical danger. But I like that interpretation, that even though this has nothing to do with Magden, there's still a trigger there. Mm-hmm. I like that. I like that you brought that up. I never thought of that. And then Perrin's like, what the fuck did I do? Because he doesn't understand where Linny's coming from.
Right.
And Gil is like, so I'm going to have the most awkward moment of my life at this point, and I'm not going to enjoy it at all.
Yeah. He's like, I have to go check on the carts. And Perrin's like, dude, the carts are fine. A blind man can see the carts are ready. What's going on? And Jill's like, so... yeah.
It's really cringe.
And so he's like, so everyone thinks you slept with Berelain. And Perrin's like, I slept in the tent. But like, literally, what did he just say? I didn't get much sleep last night to Linny. And then he turns around and says, all I did was sleep. And it's like, well, how can both of those things be true?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you explained your magic wolf dream powers, right. Then you'd have a better alias. But
no one understands that. No one gets that.
No.
Mm-hmm.
No.
I think the woman was born in Farmatting in a thunderstorm. She probably told the thunder to be quiet. It probably did.
I love that quote. I love it so much.
Was Linny born in Farmatting, or is that just an expression?
I'm assuming that's an expression. I assumed that she was Andorran, but I don't actually know.
I don't actually know if Linny is from Farmatting. And also, we got Codswain sort of in, so it's priming us for Codswain and that sort of...
Who definitely was born in Farmatting in a thunderstorm and commanded the thunders to silence successfully. Absolutely.
Let's see. I'm not getting a origin. Let me see if the wiki has something. Nationality Andorran. So I get the feeling that's just more of an expression.
Yeah.
So just sort of tracing that, Linny had likely told Brienne. Brienne had surely told every other woman in camp. Again, those were all the people who we've seen accompany Morghese through her journey. Gil, they've become part of Perrin's household and part of his sort of royal household because they have that experience. But right now they're spreading rumors. And once you gain the reputation, losing it was not easy.
Which is true for really any rumor. Reputations do precede you and expand beyond your immediate influence. Usually the worst ones spread farther, but any reputation is hard to shake once it's been firmly established.
Kenley comes back and Perrin interprets his smile as a smirk, right? Because now he's realizing why everybody's smiling at him. It's not just not looking at him because of weirdness. It's actually like, yeah, you banged Berelain. Yeah,
it's the grimace.
Yeah.
And I don't know that Kenley is necessarily grimacing at him. He sort of idolizes Perrin, but... in memory, yeah. I don't know. I feel like the older men are probably doing more of the grimace and the younger men are doing more of the awkward.
Right. Yeah, I wonder what they actually think. If some of them are like, way to go, Perrin, right? She's a hottie.
Oh, probably not.
Yeah. No?
Probably. He's married.
Right.
But I bet that some of them are less sure how they feel at first bat, whereas I bet a lot of the older men are just like already like, and I disapprove. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe the younger ones are even quicker to judge.
Again, it's all from Perrin's POV, right? We don't ever get to get into one of their heads and be like, what do they actually think about Perrin? It's all how Perrin interprets their opinions of him, which we all know is highly unreliable. Especially
on this topic. Like, he is definitely misinterpreting what's happening, except when he isn't, right? Like,
unreliable narrator to the T on this, yeah.
Yeah, we never get another POV to, like, parallax something approaching the truth. It's purely Perrin.
So Faile shows up.
Yeah. He's stalling at his horse, be like, I don't want to go deal with Maseama. And then Faile shows up and makes him wish that he had just taken off already.
Led by Salande, so another S name. Serene, Salande.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's this tiny, tiny little woman who, if you will remember, was thrown at Rand by Colliver. She's the one young woman who we actually see Rand interact with from Colliver.
And he scares her, and then she runs off.
And that fear of that experience is what drives her to have the inner strength that she does to then command Faile in subsequent books. So that's Salanda, who is now here negotiating with Perrin what Faile is going to do in Faile's absence.
And I think they're mad at him because they think he slept with Berelain, which is a betrayal of their leader.
Oh yeah, I guess they would. Yeah, I'd figured they just hated him because he was not Faile. I didn't read much farther into it, but you're right. Of course they're on that grapevine.
And so there's this antagonistic exchange between them where he's like, "Did you put my wife in danger?" And they're like, "No, obviously not." And he's like, "Well, yeah, I mean, okay, I believe that, but I still want to yell at you."
Yeah.
And then and they want their horses because they're like, we need to ride through this snow. And he's saying, and he's got control of the horses, which, by the way, them wanting horses is the least Aiel thing they do, because he's like, Aiel walk. And they're like, no, I know, but we're not really Aiel. We're just pretending to be. And so he sort of makes this bargain with them, which is basically, you'll do what I say until she's back, and then I'll provide you with the resources you need to do your job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he says horses, but I assume it's everything else they're going to need as well.
Yeah, I think specifically it's the horses, though. He's like, fine, I will give you what you want, starting with the horses.
Right.
If you fall in line.
Right.
Like, I will be your Faile until she's back. Fine. There's a lot of eye rolling in his response. And you also get this fun interaction where, like, one of the Tyrants, like, speaks up, and then Salanda, like, just does this very, like, raised finger, cryptic, you know. They have some kind of, like, Aiel level honor within their own little group that, like, you see it in this dynamic, but you never see it from the inside. You only, again, see it from Perrin being like, what is this nonsensical behavior? But you can see they're imitating parts of Aiel culture in a way that really does change their behavior. It's not just cosplay. It's, like, getting into their real lives.
Right, but at the same time, the actual Aiel who see what they're doing is like, they're getting it all wrong, right? They're totally misinterpreting it. Like, they're creating this parallel set of morals and beliefs to follow, right? That's not Jiito, even though that's what they're calling it.
Yeah, but it is genuinely parallel. Like, that's what you're starting to see here, is that, like, the depth of it is growing in kind with what they're trying to aspire to. It's cultural appropriation for sure, but you can tell that it's becoming their own. They're starting to lean into it and make their own bits of it, and give them a generation or two, and it will be its own thing, right and proper. And it's not cultural appropriation given the cultural dynamic of who has power in the situation and all of that.
Right.
But it's definitely a crude copy paste that becomes more graceful with iterations. So I think the next thing I've got is the scouts coming back with their armloads of forensic evidence.
Right, this is the Aiel scouts.
Yes.
This is after dealing with Faile, the folks who they've finally been waiting for. They've got Alejandro's gelding, and they have all the clothes that were cut off the women. They're assuming, right, this is they know that's what they do to people who are taken Gaishain.
Yeah, it's a standard issue Gaishain leavings.
In the vein of Perrin, you know, giving up some of his more subtle moral debates, he's no longer going to try and hide how good his senses are. He's just like, oh yeah, I can see them. And they're like, really? And he's like, yeah, I don't care anymore. I'm not even going to try and hide how good my eyes are. They know they're good. They're going to find out how good, because any tool I can use is something I'm going to use.
And they mentioned that who got taken and that it was only women because all the men were killed. But it's not like that. It's just a coincidence of who died. And I'm sure that they won't be harmed or abused or anything.
Yeah, right.
I think that they're right that the men would have been taking Gaishan if not for the fact that they were killed. It wasn't like they specifically were only taking women. But also the second part of that is like, nope, Shido have fallen off the rails.
And they come back, there's the warders who are coming back with them. This is the quote-unquote good party, right? These are the Aiel, the warders. These are the most skilled trackers and hunters that Perrin has in his company, which is why they found the evidence, right? Because they went to the right place. They're the ones who found it. They didn't get killed by any of the Prophet's men. They didn't run into the White Cloaks. Like, these are the skilled hunters of Perrin's group.
Yeah, these are his elites.
Mm-hmm.
And they sent on a few more of them, too. Like, Elias and a few others kept going, and this is just the bulk of them coming back to report.
Well, we've got maidens wearing snowshoes, which actually is kind of a hilarious vision to me. Like, I can imagine.
Totally
is. Like, these, like, desert warriors tromping along on snowshoes. But at the same time, that's how you get above the snow, right? So that's a lighter way of walking, I guess. It's weird.
It's way less work, but they needed to have, like, a Two Rivers woodsman with them to show them, because they were smart enough to figure out that you can use dead trees to float across rivers, but they might not have engineered snowshoes while on the march.
Right.
And there's all of these warders and everyone, like all the names here, I didn't look any of them up because none of them do anything interesting that I can think of.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I looked up a few of them.
Drift around,
right.
The wise ones and Aiel drift around, like...
They're part of the group, like Furin Alhara is Cyanid's warder,
as is Terrell Winter.
Yeah, but there's nothing, again, just as when I read through his POV, it's always with the group, with all these other Aes Sedai, with the other warders. You know, when they don't do anything on their own, when it's like they're part of the group, it's like the Aes Sedai group that accompanies Perrin and their warders, and there's nothing that pulls one away from the rest.
The warders are just the electrons to the nucleus of the Aes Sedai. They can't leave.
They return a bunch of arrows. We find that about half of them are Shido arrows, about half of them are brotherless. So it's a mix of all the other clans.
Yeah, again, gives you a sense of how much the brotherless change the strategic abilities of the Shido.
Right, and they've been gathered, right? Like it's interesting that because the brotherless weren't with the Shido when they went through the portals, right?
Yes, they were.
They were?
Yeah, the brotherless have been with the Shido since Rand's revelation of Al-Khair, and they've been drifting towards them through the Battle of Kyrian and up through Demai's Wells. No, the brotherless were, ever since Al-Khair, they've been a thing. Okay. I kind of imagine that they were the ones who were like traveling over land and were being collected by the Shido, but I guess that makes more sense if they've been with them since the beginning. And I think they've also been growing over time, right? Like, there's the ones who snapped right away and the ones who it took a week and the ones who it took a month. And like, I imagine that the brotherless are slowly growing in number over time, at least until Samael sends them to the 9 corners of the world, and then they're kind of capped at that point.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Like, is it capped at that point, or because the Shido are trying to gather up all these clans, they're sending out people, they're looking for as many Aiel as they can to gather in.
But they're only going to be finding themselves, though, right? All the other Aiel are going to be with Rand.
But what if there's a bunch of brotherless who sort of fled into the wetlands who have just been moving over land this whole time?
There could have been bands that split off from the Shido because Couladin was an idiot and now they're getting collected. They could have... Yeah, no, you're right. There's nothing says that they're all strictly with Rand or Savannah. They could be around.
That's what I'm wondering is what's the density of brotherless in the wetlands at this point that aren't unaffiliated brotherless?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it's low, but I don't know. Interesting. Let us know in the comments.
Yeah, what do you think? Where do you think? But I now that I think about it, I do prefer the idea that the brotherless were mostly gathered up by the Shido before Demai's Wells and the scattering.
Yeah, I think that's the bulk of them.
Right. That makes more sense to me.
I like how Perrin starts frantically trying to figure out how the hell this could have happened, and his mind leaps right to one of the Forsaken. It's so random. Like, why would he think that? Because that's what happened.
That's a good idea.
And and randomness. And,
Yep. We get a mention of the colors in his head whenever he thinks of Rand. Mm-hmm. So those colors are happening. They haven't resolved themselves to images yet, but Jordan's dropping those hints that, yes, the colors are a thing.
And he's pushing them down really hard at this point, and I think during the cleansing, they all come crashing in at once, and he thinks it's because he's been holding them back for so long. Like, he really is the last one to get on board with what the colors actually mean.
I mean, all three boys are trying to ignore them, right? Perrin, because he's trying to find Faile. Matt, because he wants nothing to do with anything Taviran or Rand-ish, if he can avoid it. And Rand, because he doesn't know what the hell's going on in his head. It's real busy in there. He's like, oh yeah, the color is just another thing that is driving me crazy. I don't know if it's insanity. I don't know if it's LTT. I don't know if it's the third man in my head. I don't know if it's the weirdness around channeling from using the Wool of the Winds. I don't know if it's the weirdness around channeling from crossing the streams. I don't know if it's the sickness that I'm suffering from when he's not connecting any of those things, or if it's the color, and then I've got these colors in my head. Whatever, that doesn't mean anything. He does realize at one point, though, that is telling him that Perrin and Matt are okay and fine, right? Mm-hmm. He does use that to be like, no, I know they're fine. Like, I know they're alive.
Yeah, eventually. Yeah. I think Perrin's the last one to get the memo, but you're right, they are all very slow to pick it up.
The pattern's being like, you three need to be together, here's a little hint. Mm-hmm. And again, I'll say it's one of my biggest disappointments with the Sanderson books, is he didn't have an opportunity to get all three boys together at one point.
Yeah. There's a really interesting exchange here when they talk about how many people are with the Shido, and they say, every man but the blacksmiths will pick up a spear at need. And Perrin's like, this blacksmith has picked up a spear. And it's just so badass. It's like cue explosions behind him and guitar riffs. And it's such a badass line.
But I think it really goes into the axe versus the hammer, the way of the leaf that Perrin struggles with, the fact that, like, even among the Aiel, who used to follow the way of the leaf and have abandoned it, the blacksmith is still the one person who will not abandon the way of the leaf. And then Perrin is the blacksmith who has abandoned the way of the leaf, right? There's this weird parallel between Perrin and the Aiel and the Tinkers and Aram, and the way, like, this weird, crazy symbolism comes together, because the Aiel are the people who followed the way of the leaf, who picked up the spears. And so is Perrin.
Yeah, and again, a reunion where Rand and Perrin get to realize that they both have this deep and intrinsic personal connection to the history of the Aiel and Tuatha. Like, there's so much processing that they need to get through that only the other could possibly give them, and they don't. Get it.
Yeah.
There's so much that they could both have benefited from just talking through the fact that they got yanked into this completely other culture in such an intimate way.
And Aram being sort of an example of what the Aiel could do without the Ji'ito, that descent from the way of the leaf into violence is a bad thing for Aram. Because, again, he doesn't have Ji'ito, right? That's the one thing that Elias says, basically, is you've taken away his belief in the way of the leaf, but you haven't given him anything to replace it with. You know what would have been a really good thing to replace it with? Ji'ito. Right? That tells you when to kill, how to kill, when it's okay to use violence, when it's not okay to use violence. The fact that taking someone captive is better than having them killed, right? Like, all of that would have been hugely beneficial to Aram if he'd learned it from maybe Gaul, right? Like, that would have been great. But Gaul and the other Aiel refuse to deal with him because he's a tinker. They're the lost ones.
Yeah, and maybe Rand and Perrin could have brokered that conversation, but it sure as hell wasn't going to happen on its own.
Right. So, but instead, Aram ends up replacing his belief system with the teachings of a madman, Maseama.
Yeah.
Which is brought up, actually, it's an interesting point here, because the Maseama's men are saying, oh, you're a shadow spawn, you have the golden eyes. You've been tamed by the dragon reborn. And that is eventually what convinces Aram to attack Perrin, right? He is convinced by that exact logic that Perrin must be shadow spawn because he has the golden eyes. Now we get introduced to that argument in this chapter.
Yeah, and it's so heartbreaking that Aram would come to think that after all the months of us spending time with him, but months of him spending time with him, not being bothered by the eyes, and like to have all that faith taken away is like, that's not a quick thing to undo. You know, Perrin had a lot of opportunities to bring that back around. And yet, yeah, that first reflexive fear was what he was able to be reduced to. Because, I mean, he was very afraid of Perrin the first time he saw him because yellow eyes.
Right.
Back in book 1. So he got reduced back to that very first emotional reaction.
Here we get the interpretation where they found the Shanchan. We talked about this earlier, the Shanchan camps.
Yes. They've got tracks of these strange creatures that we can identify as Rockin and I think Grolm. I think are the cats.
Yes, the six-toed cats. Yep.
Yeah, which polydactylism is so cute.
Right.
It's adorable.
On cats, not so much on Grolm.
Sure. I had a cat growing up that had 13 toes. It's so many extra toe beans.
That's cute.
So many extra. He was all black. He was so tiny and he just had a billion little toes. He was so cute.
Is that a mutation in cats or is that inbreeding? What causes that in cats?
I don't know, actually. Probably a lot of different things. I mean, it's just a matter of the genes for turning off how many fingers you make going. It's probably a zillion ways that can get screwed up.
I've definitely seen it in people with extra toes and fingers.
Mm-hmm. And I believe it's in the Amish population. Polydactylism is really high because they have such a high rate of inbreeding and one of their founding members had an extra pinky. And so it's really, really high percentage in them. I'm pretty sure it's the Amish that's true for. Oh, and chat's coming through. It's a genetic mutation in a dominant gene.
So you killed my father, prepare to die?
I guess.
I'm looking for a man with 6 fingers on his left hand.
But yeah, I think it's cute that the Two Rivers has all polydactyl cats and that the only other creature in the whole world is these, you know, creatures from another dimension that the Shanchan used to great effect in battle. It's just such a weird little, RJ, what dice were you rolling to come up with that as a plot device? But I'm here for it.
Yeah, and I think part of that is just where he's from, right? I think Jordan is from an area where they have 6-toed cats, which is why he included that in the Two Rivers.
Oh, was that a thing?
Yeah.
There's some holla down in South Carolina where there's a bunch of 6-toed cats?
Yep.
Huh. Trippy. Oh my god. Okay, chat just gave us the weirdest picture. It is a Grolm, which is a Photoshop blending of an iguana and a cat.
The head of a cat with the body of an iguana.
And the cat's head is all green because, obviously, and it's very strange.
It's very strange looking.
If that was 600 pounds clawed and ridden by a man in armor, I would be quite terrified.
So I don't think that this is the same camp they found earlier, because this is a camp, these camps of thousands of Shanchan is under the snow, sniffed out by Elias. So I think these are older tracks than the initial camp that they found earlier, which was more likely White Cloaks.
No, the camp they found earlier that Elias found by smelling, he smelled a doll, which was from the Shido camp. So
okay.
The camps that they found earlier was the Shido Sept on those. So this is the thing, right, that I was getting as I did my notes for this, is that they are tracking the Shido scouting party and the Shido Sept. Because remember, in Faile's POV, we see the raiding party rejoining the Sept.
Right.
So I think that's actually 2 of the groups we're tracking. It's the Shido in both cases, but there's the raiding party and the whole clan on the move. There is now a Komodo dragon cat mashup picture in chat, and I am disturbed. That is nightmare fuel. Whoa, and I was a Komodo dragon pug. Whoa. But then they talk about finding a camp twice. They found soldiers' camps, the same men in both places. Mm-hmm. And those are the ones with the Shanchan tracks. So he has Shanchan and Shido and... I'm so confused. Oh, I think it's because Perrin's not realizing that there's 2 groups of Shido. Maybe. I don't...
Right, so reaching in among the bundle tied to the ornate saddle, Sulan drew out a rag doll dressed in cotton soor. Elias Ventura found this just before we turned back, about 40 miles from here. He said it smelled beneath the snow. Right, so that's the first group. I told you we saw other things. Twice, Elias found horse droppings in campfires under the snow. Many horses and many campfires.
Yeah, and that's the one that Alhara says the same men in both places.
Yeah. maybe they have nothing to do with the Aiel, but they could be following, right? So it's possible that the Seanchan are following the Aiel. So that's why you're getting these overlapping campsites, right? Where sometimes you're finding Shido campsites, sometimes you're finding Seanchan campsites. And it's like they're going in the same direction. And that's different from the group they found earlier before they went out on this expedition, which was early in the chapter. And I think those were either White Cloaks or the Prophet's men.
Right. I'm still leaning towards Prophet's men for that one.
I am too, yeah.
Which makes sense, right? Because Perrin's not thinking about the Prophet's men because, the Prophet promised to only bring 100. Meanwhile, like several thousand are converging on his location. So Perrin goes back to the Two Rivers men and releases the tension by letting them know that Faile is alive and giving them their marching orders and kind of setting out what the plan of attack for travel is for the next little bit.
Right. And travel with a capital T, because he's definitely saying we're going to travel with gateways 40 miles south and then see basically to the point where the Shido doll was found. Right. Because that's what they said. The doll is found 40 miles south. That's where we stopped. And then we turned around and came back. He says we're going to go to that point and then continue to track them from there. And then Perrin says, I need to go find Maseama, Denel, someone who can give him a message anyway. And Denel says, you go among that filth alone and you'll need luck. I heard some of them talking about you. Said your shadow spawned because of your eyes. Said you'd been tamed by the dragon reborn, but still shadow spawn. You ought to take a few dozen men to watch your back. And so, again, that's where that interpretation ends up infecting Aram.
Because they're all talking about it. The entire Maseama crowd is doing that. And when Aram starts spending time over there, that's all he's hearing. Everyone's saying it. And yeah, Perrin is not sure what he wants to do about that. And then the decision is taken out of his hands by ta'veren. I mean, by coincidence.
Yeah, so Maseama basically shows up.
Yes. Maseama shows up with an honor guard. He has perhaps 100 people with 2 in advance. And so it's just an honor guard. He just shows up with enough retinue that he won't get taken captive, right? He can't get conked on the head and put in chains with 100 around him.
So the Two Rivers men use a couple of bird trills, blue tit, crookbill, and a mocker. I assume a mocker is a mocking bird, like a mocking jay, as we would call it.
That would be my assumption as well.
But I don't know about blue tit or crookbill.
Blue tits are almost definitely a bird that exists,
right?
Because ornithologists are pervs, and crookbill sounds like a bird. There's weirder bird names out there. I'm not particularly sure if either of those are real birds, but I'm going to assume that they are.
Oh, Eurasian blue tit apparently is a bird. Don't know if that's the same one.
Yeah, it's a beautiful little songbird with a yellow breast and a blue back and beautiful white, a white face with black eyeliner.
I kind of imagine them having a blue front, not a yellow front, but You
would think that blue tit would imply not a blue back, but, again, ornithologists.
But I think the tit in that case is more referring to the noise they make.
Yes, it is. It is not referring to the breast. There are a lot of tits in the bird world. Mm-hmm. Also boobies.
Yes.
There are tits and boobies in the bird world.
Mm-hmm. Birders are weird people, man.
They're really weird. Audubon was an actually really weird person.
I'm shocked.
He was a very weird person.
Very shocked, yes.
Also a bad person, but don't hold that against Audubon Society. They got founded after he died. It's a whole thing.
I feel like if you go back to the 1800s or whenever the Audubon, that era, oh, wait, everybody was bad.
No, he was really bad, though.
Okay.
I learned about him. He was a behind the bastards subject.
Yes.
Yeah, fascinating and bad person, but very, very weird also.
And I have been told to be careful with the assumption that in the old days everybody was bad, because there were people who were actually writing, this stuff is bad, we should not be doing it, slavery isn't good, right? Racism is bad. There's always been people arguing against it, and the assumption that just because you're from that era, it was normal for you to be an awful person is actually a falsehood. Yeah,
it's a point that Behind the Bastards actually makes quite frequently, even though they're covering people. It's this guy was normal by the standards of his time. This guy was bad by the standards of his time. Let's talk about the fact that there were people who would look at us and say that we're immoral with the standards of our time. They have always existed. Abolitionists are a thing. But also there are people who exceed the awfulness standard for their time.
Yes.
And it's weird how often they end up in prominent positions in our historical sense of self.
Not so weird. Turns out billionaires didn't earn all that money themselves.
Really?
Right?
They didn't work that hard?
It turns out they're stealing it.
I am shocked.
Yeah, turns out you can't be a billionaire without stealing it from a lot of people. Yeah.
Shocked, I tell you.
So there's a confrontation between Maseama and Perrin, which leads to one of the most weird exchanges ever. First of all, Maseama says, hey, all these men showed up because they refuse to be left behind.
I cannot demand it of them. They serve him as I do. It's like, what a self-aggrandizing, bald-faced lie.
Yep. Ugh. You told them to show up. They do whatever you say. Mm-hmm. And so Perrin basically says, take your men east. You need to go to Rand. I'll catch up when I can. My wife has been kidnapped. I'm going to go get her back. And Maseama's like, well, I'll come with you, right? Because he had been impatient to reach Rand without delay. I believe that's bullshit. I think that's absolutely bullshit. I think he wants to do everything he can to avoid going back to Rand. Whether that's compulsion or not, I'm not entirely sure. But it seems to me that he wants to avoid Rand at all costs. And the only reason he didn't agree to go be teleported to Rand is because he was stalling. Yeah.
Yeah, and Perrin is saying, I need to go south, which is distinctly not east, right? He wants to send Maseama due east, and he needs to go almost due south. I mean, that's like 90 degrees on the compass of difference. It's huge.
Yep.
That's not, we'll drop you off on the way. That's, we are going wildly different directions.
And I like this line. That rabble would be useless against the Aiel. Still, they numbered in the thousands, and they had held off armies, if not armies of Aiel. A piece of that puzzle in his head shifted, right? And that puzzle is, how is he going to attack the Shido and take back Faile? Mm-hmm. And I think he's realizing, I can use these people. Even if they're not very effective against the Aiel, even if they're not good warriors, they can be good cannon fodder. And that's a piece of that puzzle shifting. And that puzzle that he's got to put together of how to rescue her.
And he doesn't even fully know what the puzzle is.
No.
Right? Because he doesn't know what the game board looks like. So it's like he's shifting these pieces and they're clicking, but it's so early yet that he doesn't even articulated what he's trying to do. And he certainly can't anticipate how vital these guys are going to be to his actual final plan.
So Perrin says, listen, I'm going south and I'm traveling. And I know you don't like that.
Right, because Maseama says, I'll come with you because killing the Aiel is the light's work because I'm racist as hell.
Right.
And Perrin's like, but there's this, it's not going to be kosher, and I know that you're really religious. And Maseama's like, fuck it, YOLO.
What?
It's very weird.
He would be grieved if harm came to your wife, the madman said at last. The emphasis named Rand as clearly as the name Maseama did not allow to be spoken. There will be a dispensation in this one instance, only to find your wife, because you are his friend. Only this. He spoke calmly for him, but his deep-set eyes were dark fire, his face controlled with unknowing rage. Perrin opened his mouth and then closed it without speaking. The sun might as well rise in the west as Maseama say what he had just had. Suddenly, Perrin thought that the Faile might be safer with the Shido than he was here and now. And what the fuck, Maseama? I think we've said this many, many times, but what the fuck? A dispensation in this one instance? It's so weird.
It's so weird. Because the Dragon Reborn cares about your wife so much, more than he cares about seeing me, his one true servant. What?
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
No sense. No sense whatsoever. But he's a madman, so I guess he's doing things that don't make sense. I guess that makes sense.
No, I think that this is my favorite piece of evidence for the interpretation that this is all compulsion. The way that he makes that switch so quickly and it's so illogical. It's like he's shrewd and he's crafty and he's smart, and this makes no sense. The simplest explanation is that there's a piece of logic that the rest of us are not privy to that was inserted into his brain.
Right.
Or there's a deep strategy that I'm not seeing, but I think compulsion is a simpler explanation.
I think he's being compelled to stay away from Rand because, again, he's got a Rand in his head, right? He has someone in his dreams compelling him to do certain things, and as part of that compulsion is stay away from the real Rand, right? So he doesn't break my orders.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming there's a certain amount of if you're going to get teleported to Rand, delay. But if you find another reason to go with Perrin on this side quest, go for it.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, that he didn't take the opportunity to just go his own way when Perrin said, go your own way. Like, he decided he needed to stay with Perrin.
Yeah.
Why? Again, compulsion to be close to the real Taviran boys to be able to strike.
Maybe. Because that is the, well, Grendel said she left a trap for him. I don't think that was Maseama. I think that was in the White Cloaks. That was...
Bayar.
Bayar, thank you.
Yeah, but Maseama is a tool further along. He's not her last weapon. He's like the pent ultimate.
Right. Do we remember which Forsaken is compelling Maseama? Which one takes credit for that? Is it Grendel or was it...
I believe it's Grendel.
Okay.
Frosted Angel in the Sky in chat. Is that a picture of Rasputin that you posted as being akin to a description of Maseama? Yeah, that's Rasputin. I was like, those eyes are very distinctive, but yeah. Yeah, Maseama is kind of a Rasputin-like character in physical description, if not in demeanor. Oh my god, though, and like, I don't know how many of you guys have watched The Last Kingdom, but Maseama, the actor who's going to be playing Maseama, was in The Last Kingdom, and I'm really excited for him to play Maseama, because I think he can do Scary Prophet real easy. He's got, like, really fine-boned features, very intense eyes, and he plays a pretty chill character in Last Kingdom. I mean, he's a mercenary, but he's pretty chill. I think he's going to be... Seeing him get deeper into his range is going to be real fun. I really liked him in Last Kingdom. Anything else in this here chapter?
I guess just to say, hey, this is it for Perrin for the rest of the book, right? Like, we next get to see him in Crossroads of Twilight.
So this is the end of the plotline of Doom for this book.
For this book. Unless you also consider Elaine's plotline a plotline of Doom.
Well, it's a different plotline of Doom. It's the plotline of baths.
The plotline of suds. But yeah, no, we have a fair amount of Elaine, and then a fair amount of Matt, and then a fair amount of Rand, with an occasional Elaine thrown in there again. So sort of the end of the book is a little bit of a mix of Rand, Matt, and Elaine.
All right, well.
But cool. Yeah, I think this is the last time we get any Perrin or any Faile.
For the rest of the whole series.
For the rest
of not doing any more.
No.
And yeah, I just want to throw it out there to the audience that I will be sounding different for this episode and the next episode, because I'm not in my usual studio or on my usual mic, because I got kicked out of my house by the roofers.
Okay.
Who told me that having the entire roof redecked would not go well with my sanity. So I am in an Airbnb with my shitty mic in a bedroom sitting on a beanbag chair. So if it sounds a little off, that's why.
That's a good plot twist. I got kicked out of my house by the roofers who were just replacing my roof. I thought you were like, oh no, you've got evicted, or you couldn't pay your mortgage, or something weird was going on.
Yeah, no, I just need a new roof, which requires a lot of hammering. Got a picture from the site today that shows the giant dumpster that got pulled in, that they're going to be dumping all the old roofing materials into, and it's a big dumpster. It's a lot of roof.
Is it a dumpster fire?
I'm really hoping it's not on fire. Fire danger is currently at moderate.
We don't need no water. Let that motherfucker burn.
No, we need a lot of water. Please don't. I live in the woods. No, stop.
Sorry, the song's in my head. I can't do anything about it.
No. Yeah.
So what spurned the new roof? Why is that a thing that you need to do?
Well, we bought the house 2 years ago. Oh my God, we're coming on our third. Anyway, time is a monster.
It's still 2020 as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Yeah. We're in the third year of 2020.
Right.
That's how that works. So we bought our house in the first year of 2020. And we figured that it would need a new roof in like 5 to 10 years because it's a manufactured home. It was like 12 years old at the time. We're like, okay, whatever. And then when we got the wood stove put in last year, which listeners of the podcast may remember, we got a wood stove put in last year. And when they were up there doing the chimney install, they were like, oh, this roof is a lot spongier than it should be, and you need to replace it as soon as is humanly possible. So given that they were wrapping that project up in the fall, and I live in the Pacific Northwest, this summer was as soon as possible. So that is why the roof is being replaced right meow.
And you're replacing it with a metal roof?
Yes, we are getting 100-year metal roofing put onto it. So that way we'll get a high fidelity rain sound to lull us to sleep, as well as it's going to look really cool. And it's going to be better for rainwater catchment. And it won't need to be replaced nearly as soon as 3-tab. And also, it's a lot easier to install. We were doing like a cost benefit, analysis kind of stuff with our contractor, and the shingle roofing is cheaper as a material, but it is much more expensive to install. It takes a lot longer to install. So your labor costs go really far up. By doing metal, it's more expensive as a material, but the install is like just snapping shit together real fast, and it's real easy. And then they spend a lot less time boiling to death on the roof in early August, which is good. I care about my friends who are doing the work.
Any interest in solar?
Yes, that is absolutely on our list down the road of things to do. So that's another reason why metal roofing makes a lot of sense, is because it's easy to attach stuff to. Also, more fire retardant, more fire resistant, which we live in the woods, so fire resistant is a good thing. But yeah, we're actually also going to get some skylights, and solar tubes are going to get put in as a later phase of the project, so we get more natural light in the house. But yes, solar is definitely a future phase of the project.
So where are you staying now?
I'm on the coast. I normally live in the Central Oregon Coast Range, and I have now moved to the actual North Oregon coast. The beach is 90 seconds from the front door of this little Airbnb apartment that we are staying in. Near Tillamook, let's just say, for people who don't really know Oregon geography, just like the big slough that's full of cows and cheese. I'm near there. And we are definitely going to the Tillamook factory and doing the tour where you get to see how cheese gets made, and then you get spat out into the gift shop where you can buy fresh cheese curds, and we are going to buy all the cheese curds.
I remember doing that as a little kid.
Oh, it's so good. I did it on a field trip in my geography class in 2019. One of my last classes that I took, we went on a field trip all up and down the coast, and one of the places we went was Tillamook. And the ice cream, the cheese curds, they're just as good as you remember. Mm-hmm. They're so good. Oh my God.
Timber is demanding that I play with him right now. Sorry.
Doggo tax. Naples gets what Naples wants.
Yes, he does. He's a good boy. Okay, there you go. Settle down. Usually that's where he spends most recordings these days.
Good boy.
He's such a good boy.
Yeah, when we were driving up last night, we were able to stop in at a different Airbnb and see my stepmom, who was there with her mom and a friend, and they had this dog who I posted a picture in Light Blessed Pet Pics in our Discord server. It was this big, like, short-haired, gray and white, like some kind of pit bull mix something, just absolute brick shit house of a dog. And he was so sweet, but he walked with these really like stiff legs, so his step was really heavy. Like he just was like stomping around everywhere he went. And he was a big chonky boy too, so like he had some heft behind him. He was so sweet. It was excellent. We got out of the house late, and then there was like free tacos and a dog on the way, and it was awesome. My stepmom really came in for us.
Yeah, Timber's the opposite of that. He's a very light stepper. Like, he's very careful before he puts down a foot and puts any weight on it. He makes very sure that he's, like, stepping on the right thing, and he does very delicate footsteps. Which is, even though he's a bit of a pity, he's like a delicate pity. I don't know. That makes me think he's more like Boxer than anything else. But I did the genetic test. There's no Boxer in him.
He's got very cat-like tendencies, though.
Yeah.
He really thinks he's a cat in a lot of ways.
Timber's the most cat-like dog I've ever had, and the cat we've got is the most dog-like cat I've ever had. So there's a bit of a, like, dogs and cats living together.
This is how you truly know it is the end times.
It really is the end times.
What's up with you?
Oh, jeez. Pretty normal stuff, summer stuff. We went to the river the other day and spent the day just swimming in the river. My shoulder hurts. That's pretty normal whenever I go swimming these days. Yeah, just work. And this weekend in particular, I've just been, and this is my weekend, right? Because I work Friday, Saturday. And so, yeah, this has just been a lazy weekend for me. Gosh, I'm trying to think of anything interesting. We were looking at moving apartments, but we've decided not to because it's hard and expensive, and we had some issues with some neighbors, and we were like, let's move to get away from them, but then we're like, it's fine, we're just going to deal with them and like put our heads down and pretend that they don't live there. So there was a minute where I thought I was going to be moving, but that ended up not happening. Gosh, trying to think if there's anything else. We've been avoiding the heat. It's been 6 or 7 days of over 95 degrees here in Portland, and it's mostly just been sitting inside in the air conditioning. That it's really the heat that's been doing me in. I haven't really been up to anything just to avoid
which is the wise course.
Yeah.
Don't do anything.
Right.
That is how to survive the heat. Yeah. Again, coast range life. It's not nearly as bad. It's been hot, but like yesterday when we drove out to the coast, it was almost raining in sections. The fog was so thick. Just so cold and foggy. This morning it took until like 10 before the blue sky came out. And the wind makes it plenty cold. Like if the wind isn't blowing, the sun's warm. But the wind is very much blowing.
Well, today's definitely nicer. I think today's the first day where it's actually like, I think a high of like 80 or something like that.
Nice,
so
nice.
It's still sunny and warm outside, but it's like a reasonable temperature, which doesn't mean I went outside at all. I still stayed inside all day, and I slept in and watched some really bad TV. The Resident Evil TV show, not good. Don't recommend it. Just a good way to kill some time.
I was testing the internet here today and just put on some nature documentaries, but like on silent while we just were listening to our own music, just to like make sure that the internet was robust. So there was just like random like lions attacking zebras like in the front room like all morning. It wasn't bad. It was just not, fancy.
I made some delicious risotto last night that was absolutely out of this world. That came together really nicely. My cooking game. I don't cook nearly as often as I used to, both because of my work schedule and I'm not working as a cook. And so when I do cook, it's nice that, it's nice to get back into it and be like, oh yeah, I am good at this. I do make good food.
And now you don't hate it again, right?
I never really hated it. Like, that was one of the things I really enjoyed my cooking job, and I would absolutely go back to being a chef full time if I could get full-time hours or benefits and better pay. So if I got all three of those things, I would absolutely go back to it. But the reality is what I'm doing now is automatically full-time hours, that was my biggest problem. I was only working 12 to 16 hours a week in that last job, and it's a hard 16 hours, but part-time just wasn't cutting it. And I couldn't really get more hours unless I wanted to pick up a second job. And that's a nightmare, trying to coordinate two schedules. And
Oof.
Yeah. So now the issue is just, now that I'm working 40 hours a week, holy shit, that's a lot of time out of your week. Turns out 40 hours a week is a lot of your waking time. And then you add in the commute and the getting ready, and you realize just, oh my God, it's so many hours. Yeah, it really is just...
one might think it's too many.
I would agree that it's too many. I would, I think a household of two people should work 40 hours a week, which means two people working full time should be working 20 hours a week each.
A 20-hour-a-week job is very manageable.
Very, very manageable. So, or one person can work 40 hours and the other person can be home to take care of everything that the home needs. I would like to be the person who stays home.
That has been me. I've been really like stepping up my participation in the domestic labor front game. Like, oh, this is money. You know, if I can't earn money, I can do things that cost money. And my goodness, is it a lot of hours to keep a household of 2 very neat and tidy computer nerds in order. Like, we are not messy people.
Right.
And yet it takes me so much time to cook and clean and keep everything afloat. And like, it's a fine balance, but it's just like, God damn, I count this up by the number of podcast episodes I have to queue up just to get through all the work. Like,
I've really been listening to a lot more audiobooks. I've strayed away from podcasts. Modern events have been stressing me out, and I fluctuate, and right now I'm on much more of an audiobook kick. I'm delving deep into Fantasyland and trying to shut out pretty much everything that's going on in the real world right now. Sticking my fingers in my ears and going, la, 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 la. I don't see the abortion stuff or the wars or the recession.
So you are seeing the climate change is what you're saying, because that wasn't on your list.
I'm experiencing it.
Yeah.
The list is too long to go into right now, Aradia, of things that I'm trying to deliberately ignore.
Yeah, I actually, shout outs to one of our previous guests, Lindsay from Behind the Timeline. I discovered that podcast is quite engaging, but I'm not much of a movie buff from like the 80s movies. So I just grabbed a couple of the ones as they were finishing the 80s, but they just hit 89, which was the year that Little Mermaid came out. And Little Mermaid is not a movie that I actually watched. I watched one of the weird spin-off things.
Oh, okay.
But suddenly they are hitting all the Disney shit that is what I know and where I come from. And I love the dynamic between Lindsay and Scott, I think his name is. Really fun podcast. Highly recommend. If you enjoyed Lindsay on this show, you will definitely enjoy Behind the Timeline. But it reminded me of how much fun it is to listen to 2 people bantering with a bunch of knowledge about things that I don't know about. And so then I went back to Allie and Gus and my year of deferred episodes that I haven't listened to from them. And I'm listening to like a year ago Allie and Gus, and it's just like, this is relaxing. This is nice. This is not me trying to keep up with clever and articulate takes about how the world is good. This is just them yelling about how RJ is a pervert. This is beautiful and wonderful. And life is good.
Makes you say that. What I'm currently into right now is I'm rereading, but it's a series called The Bobaverse, but it's the We Are Many is the first book in the series, and it's about like 90s computer nerd that gets his head frozen and then scanned into a computer and uploaded into a von Neumann machine. So he gets to be a spaceship that can reproduce. He's just a computer, but it's full of like just 90s and early 2000s pop culture references, and he's obsessed with Star Trek, but he's also a spaceship, so he gets to like make all these jokes. And at the same time, like, he goes out and discovers new life and advanced life, and then he comes back and saves humanity, and it's very fluff. Like, it's just light fluff sci-fi. There's not a lot of like heavy concepts or anything about that. It's just like it's the equivalent of like rewatching Buffy or something like that. It's just like 90s pop fun. And then the audiobook narrator is quite good.
Nice. I just got a book where I was very tempted to get the audiobook, but I got it in paper because I want to read it to Brandon. But I don't know if anyone out there has ever fallen down the YouTube rabbit hole of history stuff and found Told in Stone. But if you are a Roman or Greek history buff and you like architecture and cool history stuff, you should go follow Told in Stone. Very cool channel. And dude wrote a book called Naked Statues, Fat Gladiators, and War Elephants. And it's like on audio book, and I have been wanting to get it for so long, and I finally broke and got it in hard copy because Brandon and I have been falling down this rabbit hole together. And so I'm going to read it to him, but I was so tempted to get the audiobook. I was so tempted.
I've been spending I've been buying those extra 3 credits on Audible lately and spending them. Cut all that out.
What I won't cut out, though, is a completely random other plug for a podcast that's very new and very baby little podcast, but they have a very cool cool logo and a cool sticker. Queers of Time. Everyone, go check out Queers of Time. I got to hang out with Camille, or Camille. I'm actually not sure how to say their name now because of the podcast. Anyway, I got to hang out with one of them at WotCon and very much enjoyed their takes. And yeah, their podcast is early enough that the binge is very, very short. So you can get in, like, before there's that huge binge, you can get in on the ground floor. They're only at, like, episode 5. But they are hilarious and raunchy and queer and wonderful. I highly recommend. Highly recommend you all go check out Queers of Time. If queer, hilarious takes of Wheel of Time is your jam, anyway.
I have a problem with the number of queer podcasts coming out because I can't be on them. It sucks. I'm like, what? Include me. And they're like, but you're not queer. And I'm like, yeah, I know. What do I have to, like? Yeah, anyway, that's obviously not a problem. But you're like, oh, I was on these podcasts. And I'm like, that would be nice. But I just don't fit. They're like, what's your perspective as a queer man? I'm not. Okay, that doesn't work.
I mean, I barely feel qualified when I get brought on to stuff. Like, I'm like, I just noticed that that's a thing, and okay, that's fine. It's funny. But yeah, no, Queers of Time is a hoot. And I very much enjoy following all of the members on Twitter. And then when I kind of realized, like, I kind of put it all together and, like, put it together with Camille from WotCon and was like, yeah, I got to give this a go. And then, of course, 10 minutes in, I'm like dead of laughter 3 times over and like, yes,
nice.
This is, keep it coming.
Nice.
Keep it coming. I have so little room in my life for more Wot content. And yet,
you keep adding
so
on
good.
to it. Yeah.
It's so good. It's so good. So I recommend everyone go check that out.
I'll have to add it to my list. Like I said, I'm not really on podcasts right now, but when I do get back into podcasts, I'll have some binging to do. And
it's some pretty chaotic banter around, like 2 of them are trying to have a conversation and the others are just like absolutely derailing everything in like the raunchiest way possible. So like very light and fluffy listening. Nice. There's not a lot of huge concepts, except when it does get very real, which as queers do, it goes from absurd to real very, very quickly because that is the existence.
All right, well, we've had a solid 20 minutes of preamble.
Yeah, let's get into this double header, which you were pointing out actually takes us out of the plotline of Doom for the rest of the book.
Yeah, it's the interesting thing about the plotline of Doom. If you look at actual page count, it's not that many pages. It just takes place over 3 books. It's Winter's Heart, Crossroads of Twilight, and then it finishes in Knife of Dreams, right? Which is why Knife of Dreams is such a cathartic book, because it finishes up all these plot lines that started, I mean, we say the beginning of Winter's Heart, but maybe even the end of Path of Daggers, right? Because it was the last chapter in Path of Daggers. So technically it's a 4-book plot line, right? Even though, to be honest, it barely happens at the end of Path of Daggers. It's only about, I don't know, maybe 100 pages in this. It's, in this book, and not very many pages in Crossroads of Twilight. Anyway, my point being is it's a fairly short plot line. It's just stretched out over 4 books. And I think that if it was better paced, if maybe this book had more jumping back and forth, because one thing I've noticed about Winter's Heart is it starts off with a big chunk of Perrin, then a big chunk of Elaine, and then a big chunk of Rand. And that's it. And it's really, almost all the other books, you get to switch between these different POVs where you build up to something and then he cuts to somebody else, and then he builds up to something and he cuts to somebody else. This is really just more of a straight through, and the cathartic ending is in another book, Thank you, Mario, but your ending is in another book. There's that very much that feeling of like you get to the end of this thing and you're like, wait, what happened? And it's like we never find out what happens with this storyline at all in this book. There's a lot of setup that never gets paid off, which makes it a little sloggy in the spoilers context, because there's a lot of things where it's like, and that doesn't matter. Right. And that doesn't matter. Whereas, you go to book 1 and it's like literally every single thing matters. Right. Yeah, this is... I hadn't realized how radical the pacing issues were. Like, I knew there were pacing issues just because I've been through the series so many times. Like, you get a sense for that over the iterations, but looking at it as a podcaster is just like, wow,
the plotline of Doom is really more of the pacing of Doom than it is the plot structure itself. I mean, it is very like real life, but we come to fantasy for something more calibrated than real life.
Right. I think the other thing, especially in this plot line, is there's a lot of secrets that Perrin doesn't know, but we do, right? Who is Magdan, right? What's going on with the Prophet, right? There's all these things about, like, these hints that are being dropped left and right, and it's like, well, we know Magdan is Queen Morghese. It's not exactly subtle that you're, like, dropping hints.
It's not a reread item. Yes, that's a first read item.
That's a first read item. You get it on your first read and moving on. So, you know, it's one of those things where it's not as subtle, I think, and not as interesting. There's not as much to discover on rereads as there are with some of the other plot lines.
Yeah, which is why we're blending them so thoroughly. And on that note, would you like to get us started into Perrin?
Sure. Yeah, when you say cultural appropriation, I think of sort of the letter of the word, but not the spirit of that phrase.
Yeah.
You know, like, yes, and that's also, I think, in a lot of cases, cultural appropriation is, like, not as a bad thing as we tend to give it credit for, right? Like,
no, it is. Cultural appropriation is the bad interpretation of cultural exchange. Like, there's cultural exchange and appreciation, and then appropriation is when it gets sour and bad.
Right. And but where that line is, I think oftentimes is debated among people.
Well, it's yelled about. Yeah. I don't know if debate is really a term we should be granting to most of that discourse. It's mostly just people shrieking at each other through keyboards. Right.
No, but there is a difference. And
this is not appropriation in the textbook sense, because the Cairhienin and the Aiel do not have the power differential that makes appropriation really like a thing. Their whole context is so far outside of what we have going on that it's just ugly is what it is.
Because they're imitating the winners, not the losers, right? This is the whole thing, is the Cairhien got their asses kicked and handed them repeatedly by the Aiel, and so now they're being imitated by the people they've beaten.
Yeah. And yet the way that the characters interact, it feels like a cultural appropriation conversation, so it's hard to parse. Because of the way the Aiel react, it's like, why are you appropriating our shit? But, like, they are actually the ones with more power in the dynamic. But it's a very temporary power. There's just not a one-to-one.
And I guess it would be a little different if they had an Aiel there with them who was teaching them, instead of them just imitating their interpretation of what's going on from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, they're looking at it the way that Native Americans look at Coachella and all the headdress costumes there. Like, that's how the Aiel are seeing it. Coachella's not actually what's happening in this case, but, like, that is the flavor of disgust that I get from the Aiel.
Well, explain to me Coachella and cultural appropriation with Native Americans, because that is not something I'm familiar with. Because I'm not familiar with Coachella.
Okay, so you know how rave kids like to wear feathered headdresses?
No.
And not very much else? You familiar with that?
No, I am not.
Oh. Well, you know how feathered headdresses are like the starter pack thumbnail set for...
Right.
Those are war bonnets that are only worn by warriors who have, like, done a bunch of war stuff, and the feathers represent, like, actual accomplishments in battle. And if some white girl in 3 centimeters of spandex and a giant war bonnet is dancing her ass off at Coachella and getting dehydrated because she's on too much Molly, like, the levels of that is not appropriate for a war bonnet. It is impossible to overstate. And also war bonnets are, you know, like, from one or a handful of Plains Indians, not all of Native American. It's not a pan-American cultural thing, but it's a thing for revered people who have done shit. It's not just something you pick up as, like, a cool toy, you know? It's not like moccasins or, like, beadwork that you can just get at a freaking Etsy store. It's like, this is a significant cultural item, and it's sort of a meme that people go to Coachella to wear headdresses, and, like, it's a whole thing with, like, rave kids and festival culture and people that would go to Burning Man. Like, this, it's a thing. It's a real problem. And so there's a lot of like, hey, could you not appropriate my culture, my very oppressed and fucked over culture that has actual meaning? Could you not put that on as a costume to just be high at a summer music festival please? So, sexy Indian Halloween costume, same basic vibe. And I feel from the Aiel a lot of the same discourses I get from Native Americans being that, could you not use my culture as a costume?
Right.
It's the culture as costume, I think, is what Jordan is actually like. That's the nugget of, you're using my culture as a costume. The Kyrianan are like, no, we're using your culture as a lifeline to get out of our bullshit, because clearly your culture works better.
Yeah. We're using your culture as a template to live our lives by. We might be misinterpreting it, but we are actually living our lives by our interpretation of your culture. We're not trying to use it as a costume or put it on. We're actually trying to live that way.
Yeah, which is maybe more like when, kids go off and try to like become Rastas, even though they're white and they've only ever lived in suburbia, and they're like, but I'm gonna be a Rasta now, and they like move into the commune and they try to do all the things, and like that's maybe more like what the Kyrianan are trying to do than the sexy Native American princess for Halloween.
Which I would say is less problematic. Yes, I'm not going to say it's not problematic, but at the same time, like, seeing a culture and being like, this is a better culture than the one I am currently born into and indoctrinated into, and I want to change my life to more embody what I see as a better culture, it seems like a better interpretation than I want to take this aspect of it and bring it into my life because I think it's cool.
Yeah, exactly. There are bad ways to do it and good ways to do it. But yes, I recognize the flaws in my way of life and the benefits in yours. I would like to learn more is fundamentally like how we human better. Right. That's an important part of how the human experiment continues to roll forward.
And that's where so the line between that and the cultural appropriation is fuzzy. It's a fuzzy line, one of the ways I think about it is in food, right? How you go out and you discover new recipes from, most of the food I eat and cook is not made by, white Americans, invented by white Americans, because that's what you get.
Thank God for that.
Yeah, because
that'd be awful.
that's how you get ambrosia, which is just marshmallow fluff and canned mandarins. Actual flavor comes from other cultures, and on a lot of ways, in a lot of ways you could say like all I do is take those recipes and recreate them. Is that cultural appropriation? Am I appropriating the recipes if I don't understand the history behind them and the people behind them and where they come from? I'm just eating their food.
That depends. Are you running a restaurant and making a bunch of money claiming to be an expert at this food without learning about the culture? Or are you enjoying making food in your kitchen?
Ooh, is that something I can do?
Have you met the internet?
Yeah. Oh, man. I recently, again, I'm gotten to TikTok recently, so I'm watching too many TikToks. But where a Native American person, or is it Native American? I don't remember. Someone who's not white takes the hot dog and treats it like it's like, I am going to take. That sounds
like a thing Native TikTok would do. Native TikTok is fucking hilarious.
Basically, I'm going to treat this hot dog and interpret it as a Native American food the way white people take Native American food and interpret it as, this new fancy thing they're just discovering, and you're like, yeah, that's a taco, right? Like, or that's a burrito, like, and I'm being poor with the example because I don't have it in front of me.
Oh, yeah, no, I can imagine that.
Jedi Pants is saying they saw that. I think she was Mexican because she was talking about tortilla shells. So I think it was okay. Yeah, so
same idea. I mean, that. And food is such a good place for culture to move. Mm-hmm. I mean, food is it brings people together. It transcends language. You can take spices from one part of the world and move them to another, or move them across years of time. Like, food's a great place for culture to exchange.
And that was always Anthony Bourdain's genius.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with his work per se, but I'm familiar with how people have responded to his work. So yeah, it's so important.
You should check out some of his work. Like, I gotta be honest, like, if you want to talk about actually like going to a place, respecting the culture, and meeting the native people who are there on their level through food. Like, he does such a good job with that. It's just, his suicide was a huge loss.
Yeah. And I will say that my last thing I will say about cultural appropriation is that the problem with the conversation around it is that it's mostly full of bad faith arguments and people trying to score points. And that really just suppresses the ability for us to have meaningful conversations about how it is a fuzzy and sticky and nuanced thing. It's like, when you go out, dear listeners, when you are out in the world hearing a bunch of people screaming at the top of their lungs about how you're not pure enough in whatever your argument is, like, you are being led astray from where the meaningful conversation is. Like, there's so much nuance, but oh my God, so many people want to just score points about how
right
good they are at that. And it's just, avoid that. If you get that vibe, that is not the part of the conversation you should be in.
It's one of the issues I have with Twitter is, obviously you have a limited number of characters, and so it's hard to assert something without also taking into account all the subtleties. And so it's very easy for someone to be like, oh, well, you didn't take into account this little subtle thing. And you're like, I have 140 characters, right? Like, or I guess they doubled it now, so 280 or whatever it is. It's like,
just
obviously,
make an infinite thread.
Right? No, which is not the point of Twitter. I hate those things because that's not the point of Twitter. But yeah, it's just this idea that like someone's going to call you out and be like, oh, your entire argument is wrong simply because you didn't enumerate every single possible exception. I want to score my points.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that seems to be the conversation even outside of Twitter. That is the flavor in this particular arena, and it's such a flawed, fuzzy, interesting conversation, and it's so full of noise.
Yeah, and honestly, that's a big part of, I think, a lot of our modern day discussions, is that it's all about scoring points and talking points. There's not a lot of subtlety, and, and especially, as someone who likes science and, the idea that, oh, I can't say anything is true for certain. I can only say within this confidence range. And people are like, well, then you're it's just a theory then.
It's like, first of all, you don't even understand what the word theory means,
right.
But yeah, it's quite difficult to stay sane sometimes while in conversation with people as a whole.
Hence why I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks and getting away from, like, content. Because my mental energy just has been, even though my job is still stabilized, a lot of my mental energy is still going into it. So maybe I'll eventually be able to come back into the arena of politics and real world stuff. But I just don't have the energy for it right now.
What a privilege.
Yeah, it is a privilege to be able to put that aside for a while.
Take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And come back stronger than ever.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's the key, is that I'm not walking away from it forever. I just have to put it aside for a little while.
Yeah, super valid.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or
support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?